Well, let me first do a very short recap of what we talked about. You all remember that we said mysticism is a search for the divine. People who call themselves mystic are impatient. They want to see God. They want to see Him right now, right? And then mystics are those who want to bring to reality the idea of man is made in the image of God. And we read about it in the Bible and elsewhere. But they want to bring it to reality. You know, that how can we bring to reality this idea that man is made in the image of God? Can we be like God? Can we be God-like, in effect, right? Then, of course, last week we were talking about art and mysticism. And we added a couple of other definitions to this list of definition of mystics. Anyone recalls what those thoughts were? What those definitions were?
Is the love of beauty?
Mysticism is the love of beauty. You know, when we talk about mysticism and love of beauty, you always, I'm sure you remember particularly Italy, right? You know, if you've been to Rome and Venice and Milan and Florence, and these beautiful, and appreciate art, divine art, right? Seeing the statue of David, and the works of Michelangelo in Rome and elsewhere is just amazing. It's awesome, awe-inspiring, right? You just want to go and appreciate and enjoy, and so this is love of beauty. So that's also the definition that we have. So we can also say that mysticism is an artistic expression of religion in the form of architecture, statues, sculpture, paintings. I know Mr. Sabda's son, who's not here, is an amazing artist. He was 18 or 17 when he started drawing those paintings, his beautiful vision of the faith, of our beloved faith. Drawing the painting, beautiful painting of Tyre and Mullah Hussein, the early believers. And so, you know, they made it to, I wish I'd brought some of those posters. And so this is an appreciation of the divine, being inspired by the divine, and all that. So we also mentioned, not only mentioned, we discussed at length the idea that becoming a mystic requires aware suffering, right? This is not something to avoid, but something to ask God to give us that suffering. It is an aware suffering. It's a suffering to bring us closer to the divine. So we should not say, I don't want suffering, I don't want to suffer. No, we want to suffer. But that suffering is not cutting your finger or something, right? It is that I want to become one with the divine. I want to become one with God. So this path is difficult. It's not easy, and I want to be on that path. So we want to want it, right? We want to want it and appreciate it. Otherwise, we can't get there. Then we talked about the fact that mystic rituals, you know, may include singing and dancing and poetry reading, and devotionals and yoga and all of those. These are all mystic paths, right? So any of these things that you do, or gardening, right? You're all on the mystic path. You're all on the mystic path. You should all be on the mystic path. And then we mentioned that, you know, if they give it different names and they have different, perhaps different specifics that we didn't go to, and a lot of it I don't know, but I'd like to know the harmony. I want to know what their commonalities is. That, you know, in Judaism, they call them Kabbalah, those who are on the mystic path. Or Gnostics in Christianity. We mentioned Quakers, you know. Quakers are also on the mystic path, particularly. And of course, Sufis in Islam, and the New Age religions and all of that. Now, with all that said, then I reflected and said that I've read all of these definitions, I've studied all of those writings, but then how do I, at this point, attempt to personalize my understanding of mysticism? So I don't know what you think, but that's what I came up with. That a mystic is one who can internalize at least one of the attributes of God. A mystic is one this is too much. There's too many things. I need to surrender. I need to be compassionate and kind and generous and all. So I said, a mystic is one who can at least internalize one of these attributes of God. Because it's hard to work on all of them at the same time, isn't it? But if you work on one of them, so many attributes. Beauty and generosity and kindness and compassion and justice. And then say that, let me just focus on this one thing. Because if you focus on this one thing, then all of those things would come also together with it, right? But it makes it a lot easier, right? It's not that difficult. So, for me, maybe a little late, but I've started on the path of just focusing on one of them. Now, also have my blackboard. I thought about these attributes of God and attributes, and then I came up with sort of list. Now, a lot of these names some of you friends who are not Baha'is may not know a lot about the co-founders of the Baha'i faith, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, and then the eldest son of Baha'u'llah was Abdu'l-Baha, and then the guardian of the faith, Shoghi Effendi. But as I started thinking about the attributes of God, and of course Baha'u'llah, being the manifestation of God, has all of those attributes, but at least one of them came to my mind immediately, and I wrote it down. And so as I read them, I'd like you friends, don't be bashful. If one other attribute comes to your mind with conjunction with one of these manifestations or the followers, please go ahead and say it loud. So Ms. Usui can also hear it. So when I thought of Bob, I think of sacrifice. Right? He gave his life, and he spent all that time being tortured and in persecution by the enemies of the faith. When I think of Baha'u'llah, I thought grandeur, majesty. And when you start reading the holy writings, the 100 volumes of Baha'u'llah, when you really put aside all of your prejudices and superstitions and dogmas and misunderstandings, how can you not say that this is the Word of God? This is the manifestation of God for this age. Who can bring so many beautiful writings for this age for us to read and digest and revitalize ourselves. Right? My first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. Right? The beginning passage of the hidden words of Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Baha, when I think of him, perfection. Perfection. We know him as a perfect human being who has all these virtues, right? So if you can think about him all the time, if you can read his writings all the time, reflect on his writings all the time, then we'll be on the path to perfection, right? Perfection. And Shoghi Effendi. When I think of him, I think of perseverance. In spite of all the adversities, he built the administrative order of the Baha'i faith. He translated so many writings of Baha'u'llah into English language. And he beautified the gardens of Caramel. Basically, single-handedly. He worked 20 hours a day. 20 hours a day. He woke up 4 in the morning and went to bed at midnight. All the time working for the faith. And at the same time guiding the Baha'is all across the globe, so that we will not be divided like all the other religions, right? Because Baha'u'llah says that when religion should be a cause of love and unity, if it becomes a cause of division, what did he say? You're better off without it, right? If you have hundreds of denominations, it's not the same religion of Jesus or Muhammad or Moses anymore, right? It's divided. So he says that religion should be a cause of love and unity, and Shoghi Effendi made sure that that unity would always be there. Then I thought about those letters of the living that we all know. Mullah Hussain was the first one who accepted the Bab. He was only 27. And from the moment he accepted the Bab, he went vigorously and fearlessly in teaching and spreading the faith, although he knew that he would be killed because of it, right? So, valor, when you think of Mullah Hussain, it's valor that I think of. And of course, so many other attributes. So I just wrote one of the first one that came to my mind. Tahira, the first woman who became Baha'i. And she gave her life as well. I think of her as a symbol of purity, right? Khodadoost, the young man of 22 who became the companion of the Bab and who also gave his life. I think of him as the symbol of devotion. And of course so many others, including Sulaiman Khan, Muhammad Ali. You know Muhammad Ali, the Anis, the companion of the Bab, who wanted to die with the Bab. And he said that just put me in front of the Bab so that the arrows and when they shoot, it would first come to my heart before it hits his. So, and of course Sulaiman Khan, who is the symbol of sacrifice, right? You all know the story of Sulaiman Khan, right? Who was one of those early believers in the Bab. When they came and they said that recant or we'll kill you, and he said, okay, kill me, but kill me the way that I want to be killed. And they said, how? He said, cut 9 holes in my body and put candles in it and light it and just take me around the bazaar and let me shout my love for the Bab, my love for this faith. The ultimate sacrifice, right? We have so many of those examples. 22,000 people who gave their lives in this fashion for this beloved faith, to ultimately bring unity and harmony to this divided world and to this divided fashion that we think about religion. And of course, up to the present, where so many had given their lives, including this young girl of 17 in Shiraz in 1983, right? Whose crime was teaching Baha'i class, like what we do here on Sundays. So they took her with 9 other teachers. She was the youngest. With 9 other women teachers in the city of Shiraz, where the Baha'i faith began. One by one, they told them, recant or we'll kill you. And so they didn't recant, they killed them. One by one. And she was the last. She was 17. 16 going to 17. And says, I'm not going to recant. I won't give up this fascinating faith that I have found for the pleasure of living a few more days on this earth. Ultimate sacrifice, beauty, devotion, faith. You all see it in this fascinating time of ours. And then I thought of some of the hands of the cause. You know, Khadan, the father of our auxiliary board member here. Have some of you seen Mr. Khadan? Anyone raise your hand? Some of you had seen Mr. Khadan, the father of this Khadan. You know, he was a hand of the cause. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, chose 27 people in 1950s who were called hand of the cause to assist him, basically like his assistants, for propagation of the faith and for protection of the faith. So I just wrote 4 of them. I just read 3 or 4. So one of them was Mr. Khadan. I had the honor of visiting him, being with him a number of times. And so I see him as a symbol of serenity. You know, when you saw Mr. Khadan come to an audience and speak, he would just tell us from his memory, passage after passage, from the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And he would make the connection with them. It's so wonderful as long as you're going to memorize the holy writings. Because then you won't have to do what I do, then you only read the holy writings. So he would just say a passage from the holy writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah in particular, and he would just cry. You know, the tears of joy and devotion would start coming down. So I see him as a symbol of serenity. Faizi. Had anyone seen Mr. Faizi, another hand of God? By the way, I have a segment on these YouTube, which is on my memories of Hands of the Cause. So I know him as a symbol of beauty. He had a beautiful handwriting, most beautiful, and he would just send letters. He was the age of my father, more or less, and he would send letters often to him. And his letters were basically a quotation from the hidden words with this beautiful handwriting, and then with a passage or two of saying hello and this and that. So I remember him as a symbol of beauty. And Furutan has, I'm sure some of you have met Mr. Furutan. I know him in addition to his eloquence and all the other riches that he had, and of course, master of education, for his sense of humor. That's also an attribute of God. He had an amazing sense of humor. Shall I share with you one of those humor things? I'll never forget. You know, he had another of the cause who was the oldest, who was the only one who had met Baha'u'llah. You know who it was? Of those 27? Mr. Samandari. With Samandari. Samandari was a short man with a very loud and vigorous voice. And so he said that you went to Paris on a mission to visit Baha'is and elsewhere. And then one night the friends asked him to go to a circus. So they went together to a circus. And were watching. So the lions came and the elephants came and this and that. And then these skimpy clad girls came who danced. Right? So as soon as these girls come, somebody would do his hand like this and just would hold it and then would ask Mr. Furutan, has the lions come yet? Has the lions come yet? So that was one of the stories he shared, amongst thousands of beautiful stories that he shared. So, and then Muhajir, when you had Mr. Muhajir, you know, he was the symbol of service. I mean, all of these things, devotion and humility and service. You know, as soon as there was this 10-year crusade, the 10-year plan, 1953, Muhajir said, I have to go. And of course, this is a long story. To make it short, you know, the National Teaching and Pioneering Committee said, no, you're not ready yet. Finish your, he was at the last year of medical school. Finish your education. Have a few years of experience, then you can go pioneer. National Assembly said the same thing. He just couldn't wait. I mean, this was the last semester of the school. He finished school, but he kept saying, the world is sick. You asked me to go and just, you know, say that have this pill, have that pill. The world is sick. We have to go and spread the teaching of Baha'u'llah. This is more important than me practicing medical school and medicine. This was his mission. So we sent a cable to Shoghi Effendi. Please help me, I want to go pioneering. But everybody says I'm not ready. So Shoghi Effendi sent a short cable. 3 words. What do you think? Let Muhajir go. Let Muhajir go. And he went pioneering. But not the way I go pioneering, but the way he went pioneering. He went to Indonesia. Within a few years, there were 10,000 Baha'is, and National Spiritual Assembly of Indonesia. And then Philippines, and another work. So on. This is so beautiful. So anyway, and then I thought about the members of the first National Spiritual Assembly and the second National Spiritual Assembly and the LSA of Tehran. Most of them were executed, you know, after this revolution, right? After this revolution. And so all they had to do is say, I'm not a Baha'i. They would let them go. None of them did. They were tortured, they were executed brutally by the Islamic government of Iran. And of course, presently are Yaran, the 7 Baha'is who represent Baha'is. So They're all symbols of obedience, right? Total obedience to the faith. So I just wanted to share with you the story of mysticism, right? These are our mystics. These are some of our mystics in the beloved faith, in our beloved faith. Some of the names, I also have a section on YouTube, my memory of these martyrs. Some of them I knew, like how many of you knew Mr. Mahmoudi and Mrs. Mahmoudi, who were members of National Assembly, who were executed? Such beautiful people. And Mr. Majzoub, the symbol of humility. He was a doctor of law, and just an amazing person. And Mrs. Nadiri, that beautiful woman, spiritual woman, descendant of Tahrir, member of National Assembly. Mr. Tadimi and so many others. So, by the way, do you know that their names are also the attributes of God? You know, Baha'u'llah talks about Mahmud and Majzoub and so on. So, and so before I go to this, let me also take advantage of showing you a photo. I told you to remember. Does anyone recall who this is? This is Iraj Khodadoost. I was, I guess, 3 or 4 years old. My mother. If you recall, in the first session we had together, I said that I considered my mother and my grandfather to have been mystics. And so because they, when I reflected on all of my family's members and those who are here, those who died, I could think of them as true mystics. My grandfather, because he was the symbol of absolute humility. Absolute humility. And total devotion. And he loved people in the true sense of the word. You know, when I was recalling my grandfather, I remember that he always called me Iraj Jun. Jun means what? Dear? Yeah. He never called me Iraj. For 30 years that I remember, I was 33 when he passed away. He would just call me Iraj. And he was the same with everybody. He just loved people. And I remember we lived in Kerman. And so in the evening, here, for some reason, our houses, because the world has become so materialistic, our houses are usually closed, our windows are closed, the curtains are closed, and we seldom, or at least some of us, don't interact as much as we can. We should. But I remember my grandfather, his door was always open. When he came from work in the city of Kerman, his door was open. When we said his door was open, his door was open. And tens of people usually came and just visited and loved each other and read a passage of poetry together. And that's it. And shared a cup of tea and coffee, and not coffee, tea. Persians don't drink a lot of coffee. So tea and a little pastry or something, and they went. And when I remember those days, it was just heaven on earth when you have that kind of lifestyle. You know, a simple home, the door open. Because we're all children of God, right? And if you're not together, and we don't see this love and companionship, you're dead. You die. So the more we encourage it, the better. But what about my mother? You know, she loved children more than anybody else. Of course, we were his children. There were 6 of us. You know, we lived in Tehran, and we traveled to Kerman to see the grandparents. And so I'll never forget that she would, from the way Tehran to Kerman at that time, 60 years ago, it took 3 days. It's about 1,000 miles, I guess. Maybe, no, 1,000 kilometers. 600 miles, but it took 3 days. Some roads were not paved. If they were paved, they're not inadequate. This and that. So from Tehran, anyone who's my age? No. But those who, you're getting close. Those who are close to my age, You know, it took one day to go from Iran to Isfahan. Then we slept in Isfahan. Then from Isfahan to Yazd. Then we slept in Yazd. Then another day from there to Kerman. So whenever there was a rest break, we got off the bus, and she would take an inventory of all of us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so make sure there are 6 of us. And sometimes you only remember, you know, we were teasing her, said, I'm missing, I'm not here. So she always wanted to make sure there are 6. And sometimes she miscounted. So she counted 5 and said, 1 is missing. So, but she loved children and an absolute love and devotion. I want to tell you, because she's a mystic, she passed away in 1989. And I was still teaching in Clemson, and she and my wife said, and I was reading her letter. She usually sent me a letter once a month or so, and she was a poet. And there was always a poem with it. And I was reading that letter, and I started the poem. My wife came, and I found that she has passed away. But in that poem, she foresaw her passing. So that was her last letter to me, and in that poem. So I'll show you a couple of passages as in Persian. Then I'll have somebody translate it. She said, سحر شد چشم بگشودم نظر سوی خدا کردم از او رحمت طلب کردم به سوی او دعا کردم به سوی او دعا کردم ز درگاهش دوای دردمندان را رجا کردم. Then she goes on for 20 lines, and then at the end she said, چه خوش بودم در آدم لیک افسوس آدمی دیدم منم یک ذره ناچیز و آرزوی لقا کردم. Anyway, she says in this poem that it was early dawn, and I started praying, and then in that poem she says that then it seemed as if I'm in the presence of God. All the manifestations of God are revolving around him. And I was like a speck of dust, but I was also revolving around that light, which was God. But then at the very last line, she says that, but alas, I'm just a speck of dust. And I thought that I deserved to be in the presence of God. And she apparently says this, and then she passes away. So, I've asked 2 mystics in our audience to assist me. One is Dr. Gail Lash, who's here, and the other one is Ms. Donald Summerlin, another friend of mine, to assist me in reading a few passages from the Hidden Works. And as we read it together, so we'll just read a few passages. Hidden Works, of course, is one of the main repositories of the works of Baha'u'llah, which is on the path to mysticism. It's so easy to read. The passages are so short, and I hope that all the friends spend a minute or 2 every day to reflect on 1 or 2 of these beautiful passages of the Hidden Works.
O Son of Spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. O Son of Man, veiled in my immemorial being, and in the ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee, therefore I created thee, have engraved on thee mine image, and revealed to thee my beauty.
O Son of Man, if thou lovest me, turn away from thyself. And if thou seekest my pleasure, regard not thine own, that thou mayest die in me, and I may eternally live in thee.
O Son of Spirit, noble have I created thee, yet thou hast abased thyself. Rise then unto that for which thou wert created. O Son of Spirit, vault not thyself over the poor, for I lead him on his way, and behold thee in thy evil plight, and confound thee forevermore.
O son of being, how couldst thou forget thine own faults, and busy thyself with the faults of others? Whoso doeth this is accursed of me.
O son of being, bring thyself to account each day, ere thou art summoned to a reckoning. For death unheralded shall come upon thee, and thou shalt be called to give account for thy deeds. O son of man, sorrow not, save that thou art far from us. Rejoice not, save that thou art drawing near and returning unto us.
O son of being, walk in my statute for love of me, and deny thyself that which thou desirest, if thou seekest my pleasure.
O son of man, humble thyself before me, that I may graciously visit thee. Arise for the triumph of my cause, that while yet on earth thou mayest obtain the victory. O son of man, for everything there is a sign. The sign of love is fortitude under my decree, and patience under my trials.
O son of man, humble thyself before me, that I may graciously visit thee. Arise for the triumph of my cause, that while yet on earth thou mayest obtain the victory.
O son of man, should prosperity befall thee, rejoice not. And should abasement come upon thee, grieve not, for both shall pass away and be no more. O son of man, thou dost wish for gold, and I desire thy freedom from it. Thou thinkest thyself rich in its possession, and I recognize thy wealth and thy sanctity therefrom. By my life, this is my knowledge, and that is thy fancy. How can my way accord with thine?
O brethren, be forbearing one with another, and set not your affections on things below. Pride not yourselves in your glory, and be not ashamed of abasement. By my beauty, I have created all things from dust, and to dust will I return them again.
O son of man, bestow my wealth upon my poor, that in heaven thou mayest draw from the stores of unfading splendor and treasures of imperishable glory. But by my life, to offer up thy soul is a more glorious thing, couldst thou but see with mine eyes. O son of being, thy heart is my home, sanctify it for my descent. Thy spirit is my place of revelation, cleanse it for my manifestation.
A few passages from the Holy Writings on the question of mysticism, and then we'll continue, hopefully next time. Let me say that that the major writings of Baha'u'llah, which are considered the mystic writings, are the Hidden Words, the Seven Valleys, the Four Valleys, the Gems of Divine Mystery. Now, this is one of the writings which was translated by the Universal Justice, published a few years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. The Gems of Divine Mystery. These four writings, all of them revealed in Baghdad when he was there, are considered the mystic writings of Baha'u'llah. But of course, many of the writings deals with the question of God and prophets and soul and life after death. So they're all mystic writings, whether it's from gleanings or tablets or the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, many of his talks, many of his tablets as well. So I'm going to share with you some of the specific passages that I think is important to have been shared today. How to reach God is, of course, first and foremost question. Baha'u'llah says, in Gleanings, that he had endowed every soul with the capacity to recognize the signs of God. How could he otherwise have fulfilled his testimony unto men? He will never deal unjustly with anyone, neither will he task a soul beyond the power. So he says all of us have the capacity to know God. This is what Baha'u'llah tells us. The Bab tells us, no created thing shall ever attain its paradise until it appeareth in its highest prescribed degrees of perfection. So then Bab is telling us that we have capacity to become perfect, and unless and until we become perfect, we are not ready to meet God. So that's what the Bab tells us. And Baha'u'llah again in Iran, in the Book of Certitude, says that no man shall attain the shores of the ocean of true understanding except he be detached from all that is in heaven and on earth. Sanctify your souls, O people of the earth, that haply ye may attain the station that God hath destined for you. This is the first page of Iran that says that we have to purify in order to be able to be on this path, right? That's a lifetime endeavor, of course. But we have to try. We have to try the best. Now, in the most holy book, what is our most holy book? Kitab al-Aqdas. Again, the first page of the most holy book. This is very important for us Baha'is to remember. He said, the first duty prescribed by God for his servants is the recognition of him who is the dayspring of his revelation, which means that at every age God sends a messenger. The messenger of God for this age is Baha'u'llah. The first duty of man is to recognize who that manifestation is. Then he says, it behooveth everyone who reaches this sublime station to observe every ordinance of him who is the desire of the world. These twin duties are inseparable. Neither is acceptable without the other. You know, in some past religious traditions, it was said, at least by some groups in those religions, that as long as you believe in this, you believe in Jesus or Muhammad or whatever, you're saved, right? The question of being saved. But Baha'u'llah says that becoming saved, is not that you believe in Baha'u'llah, you believe in Jesus, you're saved. You have to believe, and you have to do what? And you have to obey the laws. He says one without the other is not acceptable. So that's also important to know this path. Then he says, immerse yourselves in the ocean of my words, that ye may unravel its secrets and discover all the pearls of wisdom that lie hid in its depths. Again, this is the path of a lifetime. At least he says, you have to do it twice a day, morning and evening, in order to get this path. Now, let me also share with you a couple of passages from Abdu'l-Baha because our time is running out. Abdu'l-Baha says a lot of things we have talked about in the course of the 3 sessions. We talked about the path of the mystic, which is prayer, meditation, periodic seclusion, reading of the Holy Scriptures, and then being on this path, which means that being on this path of practicing these things, and ultimately service, right? So Abdu'l-Baha says it in this passage, these and more. He says, to know God in effect, and to be with him, first, it can be achieved through the knowledge of God. Second, through the love of God. Third, through faith. Fourth, through philanthropic deeds. Fifth, through self-sacrifice. Sixth, through severance from the world. Seventh, through sanctity and holiness. A mouthful, right? So all of these things, all of them, ultimately we have to be pure and sanctified and holy in order to be able to receive His grace. I'm just going to go to the conclusion and briefly tell you some of the things which I found to be some of the distinctive aspects of mysticism in the Baha'i faith. First, the definition of man by Baha'u'llah. You remember that definition of who is a human being? Who is a human being? Baha'u'llah says a human being is one who dedicates himself to the service of the entire humankind. That's the definition. A human being is one who dedicates himself to the service of the entire humankind. So we know our path. That is his definition. Then he says that Abdu'l-Baha interprets the writing, that we consider man the sum of all existing perfections. We have the ability to internalize all of these virtues. He said we consider men, human beings, to be the embodiment, the sum of all existing perfections. Then he says, both before, because we said that, well, we'll get there after we die, but then Abdu'l-Baha says, both before and after putting off this material form, there is progress in perfection. He only progresses in the state of humanity, but human perfections are infinite. So we are on this path of perfection. Isn't that a wonderful feeling to have? That we are children of God. We are on the path of perfection. We have the capacity to be on this path forever. That's a wonderful feeling, right? He says, Baha'u'llah again in the Gleanings, every man hath been and will continue to be able to appreciate the beauty of God. Had he not been endowed with such a capacity, how could he be called to account for his failure? Then he says, account each day are summoned to reckoning. He's in effect telling us, you have the capacity to be perfect, so if you are imperfect, you have to account for it. I have read this so many times that I came across this and said, you know, I hadn't thought of it this way. Then he says, every man hath been and will continue to be able to appreciate the beauty of God, the glorified. And then he says, the faith of no man can be conditioned by anyone except for himself. And this is the idea that in the Baha'i faith there is no preacher. Nobody gives sermon. We share these thoughts, but nobody is there to dominate and say that this is the way. We all need to read the Holy Writings and understand it for ourselves. I had to leave without also saying some of the distinctions here. Let me just say this as well. That, in the Baha'i faith, man is not considered as an incarnation of God. He is not. The servitude and servant and God relationship always exists. He's the master, we're always the servant. We consider ourselves a drop in the ocean, but there's always that servant-master relationship in the Baha'i faith. The other important thing we need to consider, that according to Baha'u'llah, man's knowledge of God comes through the manifestations of God. This is important. The 7 valleys and 4 valleys was composed mainly in answer to a lot of Sufis who thought that they can reach God without the assistance of manifestations, the intermediaries being Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad and Baha'u'llah and the rest. He says that intermediary is necessary. Without it, we cannot get there. One more thing, friend. So, Baha'i Mysticism is still the path of prayer, meditation, delving into the Holy Writings, internalizing the virtues and service. But, when I was composing my thoughts, I wrote this. But perhaps, more so than the past, the mystic path of the Baha'i faith is bringing to reality all the different aspects of life on this earth, which means putting it to work in politics through clash of ideas for the good of mankind. And this is the Baha'i vision. Politics division, or politics and Baha'i faith becomes a clash of ideas for the good of mankind. In economics, through equity, justice, avoiding extremes, and spiritualization of economics. This is the mystic path, right? In administration, or assemblies, through consultation, so that they become unified and harmonized and one with the Master of the universe. In work, because we consider work, it's worship in the spirit of service. And in our daily pursuits, through moderation, patience, suffering, surrender. Ultimately, we have to surrender to God. Faith and confidence, certitude in the path that we are on. And of course, in our approach to life, that's why Baha'u'llah says a human being is one who dedicates himself to the service of the entire humankind. A discussion of mysticism and the Baha'i faith is incomplete if we don't address the 7 valleys and the 4 valleys and other related tablets of Baha'u'llah. So I just want to touch upon the 7 valleys. The 7 valleys is inclusive of these 7 parts in the writings of Baha'u'llah. He calls this first valley the valley of search. And he says the steed of this valley is patience. And he says that the seeker should go everywhere and should search everything because he's on the path of searching the truth. So he should be open and unprejudiced and unbiased and be able to search until he finds the truth. Then he says the second valley is the valley of love. And he says the valley of love and the fire of love burns to ashes the harbors of reason. And so with that yearning, and now if somebody is in search and has come to the object of his adoration, but at that point he's not using reason a lot, he's just in passion of reaching the beloved. And then he talks about the valley of knowledge, and he says in that valley you go from doubt to certitude, from darkness of illusion to the guiding light of the fear of God. So this is where we are certain that we have searched and we have used passion in it, and we now are firm in our belief. And then he said from there we go to the valley of unity, and he says piercing the veils of plurality, ascending to the heaven of singleness. And in this vein, Baha'u'llah talks about the idea that sometimes if you put some kind of a mirror in front of the light, that something that tries to shed the light through another medium, you may be seeing light in red and blue and red and all other different colors, but that does not mean that the color is different. That means that your vision is different because of the medium that you've put in front of the light. So he says ultimately you need to come to that point of unity and harmony. And he says from there we go to the valley of contentment, from sorrow to bliss, from anguish to joy. When we have reached this point and we surrender our will to the will of God, then we reach that valley of contentment. And from there he says we go to the valley of wonderment, seeing wealth in poverty and freedom as sheer impotence. And from this wonder and awe that we have for this universe, the ultimate valley calls it the valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness, dying from self and living in God. dying from self and living in God. And that is, of course, what he calls is the ultimate bliss. And of course, we should have talked about the four valleys. Right? And so the four valleys is composed as a complement to the seven valleys, and these writings are in response to some Muslim Sufis who, at the time, many of them thought that they can reach God without the medium of a prophet or manifestation of God. And Baha'u'llah tells us that God cannot be reached except through manifestations of God. So at every age, God sends a messenger, like Moses and Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad, and now for this age, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And it is through their teachings that we can reach God. So in the four values, he talks about other attributes of God that he calls it Maqsood and Mahmud and Majzub and Mahbub. So in the first valley, that our purpose is that the self of God is at that point standing within us with his laws. And he says at that point the self is not rejected but loved. And now we have come to the point of accepting the laws of God and in believing in God. And he says the second value is the value of Mahmud, or intended one. And he says this is the primal reason, which is known as the prophet. And we can get true knowledge through prophets or manifestations of God. And he says the third value is the value of Majzub, or pure attraction and affection, beyond self and passion and self and reason. It is beyond words and help us see the inner reality of our Lord. So here he says that we are attracted, and he is who we are attracted to. And if a man is in that position, he can also be attractive to others. And he says the fourth value is the value of Mahbub. And here he says he does what he willeth and what he pleaseth. God does what he willeth and he pleases. And now I'm in the point of complete surrender and completely absorbed and attracted to the light of God. Now, I've written a few words here in Persian. Baha and Allah and Masail and many others. And many of the friends are familiar with these words. These are the words, many of them are Persian names, and many Persians use these names for their children, like Baha or Allah, and or Nur. And these are at the same time the attributes of God. And these attributes of God then are also the names of each and every Baha'i month, like splendor and grandeur and light and the like. Now, mystic paths in other religions are often trod by a master or a teacher. Baha'u'llah rejects priesthood of any kind. And then says that basically we can reach God through the medium, which is the manifestation of God. The other aspect with regard to the Baha'is and mysticism is that monasticism and withdrawal from the world are also rejected by Baha'u'llah. We have to be engaged in this world, is Baha'u'llah's teaching. He also rejects some of the practices of some mystics, which means not working and not working at all, so that they'll become dependent on others. And in fact, some of them go begging from door to door, and they call themselves mystic. So Baha'u'llah rejects this way of mysticism. So ultimately, Baha'u'llah wants Baha'is to seek and pray and ponder and reflect with humility and submission to the Word of God, and get together in service to each other and to the community at large. And then we don't have a separate group of Baha'is calling themselves mystics. All Baha'is should be on the mystic path.